Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of the Children and Family Scrutiny Board. My name is Councillor Dan Cohen, and I will be chairing today's meeting. The meeting is being webcast on the Council's website so that any members of the public who are unable to observe in person can still observe and watch us remotely. Can I wish each and every one of you, both here in the room and watching, the thousands of people watching online, a happy and healthy new year. It's still January, we can still do it. And of course, a happy and healthy Chinese New Year too. Turning to item 1, appeal against refusal of inspection of documents. I believe there are none. Item 2, exempt information.
There is none, Chair.
Item 3, we do have a late item.
Not a late item, Chair. We have supplementary item relating to agenda item 8, which was circulated earlier this week. That's an additional appendix linked to the bereavement support services item.
I was close.
Nearly.
Declarations of interest. Can I just flag up, in addition obviously to my declared interests, we are going to be talking about further education. My daughter attends Leeds City College, and I'm conscious that Leeds City College are involved in the presentation. I think I've mentioned that previously anyway, but it's partly a boast actually, as well as a declaration of interest. Any other declarations of interest? I see none, thank you. Apologies for absence and notification of substitutions.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, so we have apologies from one of our co-opted members, Kate Blacker, and we also have Councillor Timmins attending as a substitute for Councillor Martin. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Timmins, for substituting today, and welcome. Takes us to the minutes of the 11th of November. Does anybody have any corrections, fundamental matters arising from those? I see none. Is somebody happy to propose them as a correct minutes? Thank you very much, Councillor. And second, thank you very much. Okay, that takes us to item 7, which is, no, I might have jumped an item. Yes, item 7, further education in Leeds. Who's going to kick us off? Thank you very much.
Good morning, Councillor Helen Hayden, Exec Member for Children and Families at Leeds City Council, and thank you, Chair. So this paper sets out the significant challenges facing further education due to our city's demographic shift. It's something we've been aware as a local authority with statutory responsibility for sufficiency we've been aware of for a number of years now, and the current bulge in, I'll call it a bulge, and in 16 to 17 year olds is expected to rise from just over 18,000 in 2023 to nearly 20,000 by 2028. I also need to declare some interest because I contributed 2 children to that bulge who are currently in year 10 and year 8. So by 2028, we'll be in further education in Leeds, I hope. So we must ensure that there are sufficient places in further education to accommodate this growing number of young learners and to continue to address the challenge around the number of young people who are not in employment, education or training. So as I said, we've been alert to this challenge for a number of years, and I'd like to thank everyone who has been working to address this issue. A gap analysis was commissioned in 2023, and the Post-16 Forum has been re-established last year, which has successfully supported Greater Partnership working and the delivery of an additional 900 in-year funded post-16 places targeted at the areas of greatest need. That took an enormous amount of work. It seems very simple for me to say that, but I'd like to thank all the partners in the Post-16 partnership and Andrew Cowan at Leeds College, who has been working with us, and Colin, for allowing that to happen, and it's been an enormous part of work, and to the DFE for recognising and listening and funding those 900 extra places last September. This includes double the number of independent providers this year, and again, it's not just colleges and schools in the city, but our independent providers, which have doubled due to the government giving us those 900 extra places, and the 16 to 19 partnership are working hard to connect young people to the opportunities in the city. In December, I met with Minister of State for Skills, Baroness Smith, to update her on the situation and to advocate strongly for Leeds, and will continue to support everyone in the city working on this issue into the future, and continue to lobby government for the extra money and funding and capacity that we'll need towards whilst we get to 2028. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just come in with some brief comments. So my name is Julie Longworth and I'm the Director of Children and Families. I think I want to start really with just reminding us all about child-friendly Leeds, and the fact that the vision, the ambition for child-friendly Leeds is that Leeds should be, we want it to be, the best place for children to live and the best place for children to grow up in. And that really requires us all to place children at the heart of our inclusive growth strategy. We want our children, we want our young people to be able to fulfil their potential. We want them to be able to make a successful transition into adulthood, because we want them to be able to enjoy everything that this city has got to offer, but we also want them to be able to contribute to the city, and be their best and give their best, as I've said, in terms of their own potential. When I came into the interim post as DCS and then the permanent post as DCS, and having had a background in developing connections across North Yorkshire in a previous life, and that very much relates to the 14 to 19, 14 to 25 agenda. I suppose I did have some concerns about the stubbornness, really, of our NEAT data, and that had been the case for some time. So I really felt that I needed, and we needed as a partnership, some assurance around the activity, the arrangements that we had in the city around the 14 to 19, 14 to 25 agenda. So again, true partnership style in Leeds. I was able to talk with Colin, talk with Andrea, and we seconded Andrea into the local authority to work with colleagues within the directorate, subsequently Dan, when Dan came into post, to really review the current position. And within that, what was working well, but also where there were potential gaps. The report sets out, I suppose, the duties in terms of sufficiency, in terms of funding, and also in terms of delivery. At point 21 of the report, you will see that it sets out all of the activity that's come about as a consequence of the partnership and the work that's been underway between our providers. Andrea's leading on that alongside Dan. The report also sets out the progress that has been made in terms of that additional provision, but we know that we are not there. We know that there's a lot more to do. So I'm very happy to take questions, Chair, but equally if you and if the board would find it helpful for Andrea perhaps to give a brief overview of the work that's been underway, we'd be very happy to do that, and it might just set the context a wee bit.
If that's okay with Andrea, that would be really helpful.
Absolutely fine, yeah. And just to declare an interest, I am employed by Luminate Education Group, which is one of the big further education providers, as well as having my role within Leeds City Council. I would say that there's not really an awful lot to add in terms of the breadth of what's been covered by Councillor Hayden and by Julie. The key things that I would draw out about the work that I did was that what we uncovered in Leeds, which is reflected nationally. So this isn't a Leeds situation. All our core cities across the country are actually having a very, very similar experience in terms of sufficiency for post-16 places. What we found was that the offer that we had post-16, there weren't enough places for young people, but where the places were available, they were not necessarily at the right level. So as an example, I would say we've got provision. 75% of our post-16 provision is made at level 3, which is A levels or equivalent, and much of that is delivered either in school sixth form colleges, and some small amounts in further education. And then level 3 vocational and technical programmes primarily delivered in the further education sector. When it comes to entry and level 1 and level 2 provision, none of that is delivered within the sixth form sector, and we're very much reliant on further education, and now we've got an increasing number of independent training providers who are able to offer that. But we're still in a disproportionate position, because the number of our young people who leave year 11 able to progress on to post-16 at level 3 is 65% of the cohort. The number of places available only reflect 27% of the places available. So we've got almost a 10% shortfall for those young people who are already disadvantaged because of lower levels of attainment. The second thing I would draw members' attention to is the geographical spread of the issues here, and this results partly from our post-16 provision in sixth forms being offered in the outer rings of the city, in the outer suburbs of the city, which means that those young people in the wards with the highest levels of NEET, unemployment, and social and economic under-resourcing are the young people who have to compete for these places in post-16. So the other element of this is really to look at how we can target geographically and in terms of access to young people attending 11 to 16 schools in particular. I would say that the result, how we got to this position has partly been the way post-16 education has worked in previous years. It's been very much a market approach where providers make decisions about what their offer is. And what we're looking to do now with Dan's guidance really is work within a post-16 forum collaboratively to get a much more planned offer for the city which meets needs and targets provision to where it needs to be. Within that, the last thing I'll say is the subset of young people who have high needs education, health and care plans, or are attending alternative provisions, or are not in education, in statutory education, either through attendance or lack of places that meet their needs. So, yeah, open to questions, really.
Thanks. So I just want to bring in some other colleagues first. Nikki, is there anything you want to add in? It's not compulsory, by the way. No. Okay, that's great. Colin, anything at this stage?
Yeah, I'll just emphasise a couple of points, if that's okay, Chair. One is the excellent work that the Council have been doing and the providers have been doing, particularly over the last year, 18 months, in terms of strategic partnership work. And secondly, just to highlight the fact that nationally the DfE have come back to Leeds to ask us to share what we've been doing in terms of liaising with the DfE with other core cities, highlighting the fact that Leeds have done this in exemplary fashion and done it before anybody else. So there's some real positives in this. I'm just going to highlight what I see as the key issue. And Andrea's just put this in more detailed terms, but bluntly, we've got more than enough A-level places in the city to provide choices and places up to 2030, and probably with places to spare. We simply don't have enough physical capacity at entry level, level 1, level 2, and for a range of technical education courses. And those courses provide for around 50% of our young people, and that's not going to change. We have a real crisis point coming in summer 2026, and in the end there's all sorts of other challenges, but within Leeds we actually need more physical capacity. Nothing else will. There's lots of ways of doing it, and there's lots of other things we need to do. But if we don't have the physical capacity, there will be a larger number of young people not in education and training.
I don't know why I'm putting my hand up, I'm the chair, I don't know who I'm waiting for. So just to clarify that, because essentially, when you're saying physical capacity, essentially you're talking about capital funding injection.
We need capital funding from the DFE.
Yeah, I think it's important that we're really clear what specifically the ask and the challenges around that. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I interrupted you. Was there any? Oh, happy coincidence. Thank you for that. Kelly, anything at all that you want to bring in at this stage?
Just to kind of reinforce what Andrea has said, it's something which at Yorkshire Learning Providers we did a review into NEET, 16 to 18 NEET, and basically it summarises, it was pan-northern, but it touches on all of what Andrea's just addressed about suitability, about accessibility, about being hyper-local provision for young people, and the sufficiency of what's there as well.
Thank you for that. I should have just said that Kelly is the operational lead for Yorkshire Learning Providers. Okay. So this item was flagged in the first instance by Councillor Goodall. So I'm going to bring you in first and then we'll open up for wider questions.
Thank you. Thanks for the report and the detail in the report, and thanks for the work that's going into this. So it looks like there's enough level 3 A-level provision, but we're struggling with vocational, especially at level 1 and level 2. You've partly answered this already, but I'd really like to hear from providers what are the key things that you need to make the extra provision happen to make the extra provision happen, and perhaps imagining unlimited resources, just to hear generally what the key things you need.
Can I come in? And in the end, it is capital investment to increase physical capacity. But I'd highlight that with some more detail. So in the budget, post-16 education was allocated 900 million nationally of capital funding. However, the way that works is there's nationally a large number of capital projects in progress that won't finish on time. So the DFE is going through a process of working out how much of that budget allocation they need to spend to complete the existing capital projects nationally. Within the next couple of months, they will then decide how they're going to allocate what money remains. There are a number of needs and a number of cities nationally who need that money. Inevitably, the money is not going to be enough to meet the need in every place in the country. I'm just going to say this really simply. I'm assuming that our job collectively is to put Leeds at the front of that queue, and bearing in mind that the DFE will be going through this process quite quickly now. So the opportunity to influence that and put ourselves at the front of that queue for a relatively limited amount of money is now.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks, Colin. Dan Barton, Deputy Director for Learning. Really, just off the back of what Colin was saying and what others already have said in the room this morning, is that in terms of our structures and our arrangements and our partnerships, I think we've positioned ourselves really well with the work we've done so far in terms of sufficiency, identifying gaps, and also the partnership that we're talking about has the DFE in it, represented at quite a senior level round the table. And so that means that as we're having these conversations in real time, DFE are part of those, so we're well positioned. Thanks.
Thank you. Just to go back to the original question of what we need, and just to reinforce Colin's point, from a Leeds College of Building perspective, what we deliver is very space hungry, and the need for those large workshops for technical skills development is crucial. And taking the point around how we position this, construction is critical to house building, to mass transit, and to retrofit. Those are high priority areas for the government and should be used to really put us at the front of that queue, because we are the largest provider of construction apprenticeships in the country. We're the only college that delivers just construction and the built environment programmes, and we're very much part of Leeds. And using that uniqueness, I think, is really important. But it's the actual physical space for technical delivery, which is really important for us.
Thank you for that. Oliver.
Good morning. Thank you very much. I've got three quick questions. So the first one, page 20.5, talks about provision for SEND and high needs learners, and looking forward, being aware that that there has been an increase, and particularly for those children and young people going through the pandemic at different stages. Could you tell us a little bit more about what provision there is moving forward, and particularly being mindful of the children and young people whose education was significantly disrupted, and there are needs arising from that? So that's one question. Second question, page 24, talking about the gap analysis. And I had a question about English language proficiency, and I should declare an interest here. I work away from council stuff. I work in the examinations sector in this area, but it seems to me that this is a particularly important issue, especially as a city, because we have higher than average numbers of people with English as an additional language, people who've come here as refugees, people who've come here through other routes. And is there any scope, and this is also a political question to some extent, is there any scope for us also lobbying the Home Office around this, and particularly when it comes to support around integration? Because it seems to me that English language proficiency is absolutely essential, and particularly when we're thinking about young people who've made this city their home. It seems to me that's a gap that we really can't afford to have, and I do think that it's not solely an education issue. I think there's also an integration issue, and I think it's something that we could be lobbying the Home Office for, so perhaps that's a question for Councillor Hayden as well. And the last question, talk about those who are young people who are not in education, employment or training. We had quite a helpful breakdown by ward, seeing the numbers across the city. It'd be quite helpful, and possibly as a later item, or possibly as additional information after the meeting, to know a little bit more about demographic and social groups within that, because we're aware of the geographical patterns across the city, but there will be particular communities where there are higher needs, where there are higher challenges, and I wonder if we should be, I feel that we should be, it would be helpful to understand this not only from a geographical point of view, but also understanding it in terms of different societal groups. There are many things that we will suspect, many things that we will know as members, but it would be helpful to have that breakdown as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm happy to come in, perhaps on some general points, and then I'll hand over to Dan for maybe the detail in terms of just some of the provision. I think in terms of, I suppose, the city being fit for purpose, and it comes back to the point I made at the beginning around, you know, our ambition to be child-friendly Leeds, I think that is recognising the needs of the children within our city. And what we know nationally, and what we absolutely know in Leeds, is the huge, significant increase that we have had in the city of children who do have additional complex needs. So, you know, children who do have SEND. In addition, we've talked already this morning about the fact that we have had a significant growth in the number of adolescents in the city. I think we're something like the 7th biggest growth in all local authorities of adolescents. But in addition to that, that growth in adolescence taking place in the areas of highest deprivation in Leeds. And again, we've talked here previously about the relationship, the link between poverty, children living in poverty, abuse, neglect, and children then requiring additional services and you know, at the severe end, requiring the need to become looked after. We're having some really live conversations in the city, you know, with providers around this table and others, really experienced education providers in the city. And we've talked here previously before about the curriculum. You know, when I look at my 2-year-old and my 5-year-old grandsons, they are very different children than, you know, my adult children were at that age. So there's something about how do we ensure in the city that we've got the provision, we've got the curriculum, which is responding to the needs of children in 2025. I think that does link to your point about speech and language, you know, and English language proficiency for all sorts of reasons, you know, whether that's children who do have additional needs, whether it's children who have neurodiversity, whether it's children whose first language is not English. You know, what we know is that a child's ability to read, you know, is a determinant for all future outcomes. You know, so if we can't equip our children, you know, with that skill, with that essential skill in life, then we are doing them a major disservice. We have got some innovation around that, and for me that really starts in early years. You know, it starts with our childminders, it starts with our nurseries, it starts in the home, you know, it starts pre-birth. An example of that, I suppose, is some of the partnership that we've had with Nesta in the city, who've really helped us to review how accessible our children's centres are in the city. And when we undertook that review with Nesta, what we identified is that there were some children's centres in the city who actually were engaging with a huge diverse community. You know, so families from the global majority, you know, really engaging fully in those services. But in some of our other children's centres, that was not the case. So we've done a lot of work speaking to children, speaking to families about what that was about, actually, and we've shaped our services to respond to that. So I think it is, you know, for me, it's back to that inclusivity, it's back to inclusive growth, it's back to ensuring that we are identifying the needs of children, whether that's speech and language or whether that's other additional needs, that we're responding to those so that they can then engage with education. But the other thing I would say is workforce development as well. You know, I think because we have partners right across the city, you know, whether that's colleagues in, you know, our childminders, our nurseries, our specialist provision, you know, mainstream schools, you know, and I hear, you know, actually we at times are struggling to meet the needs of the children in our city, because as professionals we are having to constantly develop. So I think there's something here again, you know, more broadly for me, which is about workforce development, how we're ensuring that we've got the skills within the workforce to meet the needs of the children that we're seeking to support. But I'll hand over to Dan just in terms of the provision and some of our plans around that.
Thanks, Julie. So, Councillor Edwards, there was key points which I'm going to make sure we cover or try and answer across different colleagues up at the end of the table. SEND, English language proficiency, lobbying and needs. So I'll try and cover all of those. The paper makes clear that Leeds City College are the largest provider of high needs places in the city around post-16. But I think it's important to note that that growth in demand across SEND is happening everywhere. It's also happening at the top end of high needs, which silks and specialist providers in the city, and I'll hand over to Louise perhaps to put a little bit of colour on that in a minute, are delivering. And so as those children work their way through the education system, we increasingly look to our specialists, special schools, silks and other specialist providers to work with us in partnership to develop innovative ways of creating the right kind of curriculum and setting which helps those children coming out of a specialist school to have a seamless transition into the most appropriate setting. So that's perhaps something which we'll hand over to Louise about in a second. In terms of that, you know, you mentioned post-COVID, English language proficiency. We're in the middle of going out to an expression of interest to all schools in the city to enter into partnership with us to be resource provision schools, which is where we provide additional funding to mainstream schools to provide sort of resource bases and human resource to meet need. We've identified the speech, language and communication and SCMH, the priorities for this wave of RP. Part of the reason for those two things being together is that, exactly as you say, post-COVID, we don't always know if the expression which might manifest behaviourally or in terms of SEMH, social, emotional, mental health, is sort of integral to that young person, or whether it's a product of the inability to communicate. And so we know that we need to develop a setting that's going to be able to try and identify and understand, and actually hopefully children would go back into mainstream school settings. I'm answering this because although this is an FE conversation, you kind of touched on it all, and actually the early years bit is where the language proficiency is best handled, notwithstanding the fact that we have older children across the city. And I should mention, although we won't go into it now because we're coming back in March to talk a little bit more in detail about the Best Start and Beyond strategy, which is about our conception to age 5
I'm going to be a bit
approach.
rude. Can we try and be really laser-like?
Yeah,
I
sure.
understand why you're giving that deeper context, but I think it's really important for the purpose of that we really try and focus laser-like on on the post-16 piece, because you're right, everything's a building block. I get that, and I think the board gets that, but I don't think that's going to necessarily be the key short-term driver on how we are going to tackle what we've identified. Yeah?
Yeah, fair point. So I'll hand over in a second then to Louise Quinn from East Silk. But in terms of English language proficiency, that ties in with the fact that we've identified that those level 2, level 1 and entry level places are our key priority. So that's kind of linking with what Colin's previously said. Mindful of what the Chair has said, I'm going to pass over to Louise to perhaps give us a little bit of a flavour of what the partnership post-16 work is looking like within the specialist area.
Good morning, I'm Louise Quinn, the Executive Principal at the East Silk. We're based in the east of the city, and the main site is John Jameson, but we have 6 other sites. I've been asked to come along today because we had to start the conversations with colleagues at Leeds last year due to the expansion of our post-16 provision, or the need to expand that, and we successfully have partnered up with the Bridge Community Church in Ryder Street to lease spaces there in order to be able to increase our capacity. However, just like Colin has said about summer 2026, that's when we're going to hit crisis point where we don't have any available spaces left in post-16. We don't have enough to meet the capacity or the children that we currently have, and that keeps going forward until 2028-29 as well. So from, I think the previous question was about what would you absolutely, if there was no restrictions, what would you have? And I think my ask would really be around looking at specialist post-16 college or provision within Leeds, but that requires space, because at the minute we're renting space to do that at the Bridge Community Church, but there are children who are much more complex where that isn't suitable provision. So we don't have enough provision for September 2026. We've grown 40% for September 2025. There'll be a 28% increase the following year, 20% increase in post-6 numbers. That's just in the East Silk. That's just our children who we currently have moving through into 16 to 19 provision. So that's I think the clarity that I can provide on that, and that there is insufficient space. And we have as yet not undertaken the full analysis of all of the Silk provision. The gap analysis has been taken within mainstream primarily, and although there are high needs learners there, the highest needs learners often sit within the Silk, though they do sit within the Vine and Joseph Priestley as well. Is that correct?
Thanks, Louise. So just to flag then, our conversations with specialist Silk principals and leads within the city are very live. We met yesterday, we meet monthly, and that 40% growth that Louise was talking about is something which we've been able to facilitate. As you know, we've just agreed to rebuild Broomfield South Silk with additional places, and we've also initiated the White Rose post-16 with South Silk as well, adding post-16 specialist places. Last question was around NEAT, just to flag. So we know that we're in an improving position in terms of our knowledge about the children who are NEAT. That doesn't necessarily mean that the NEAT level is going down appreciably in the way we would like to see it. And there's something about identifying, this is the last thing I'll say, the fact that availability of places doesn't necessarily solve the NEAT problem, because children have got to want to go to those places. So carefully tailoring and doing as much work as we can with the independent sector to make sure that we're delivering the courses that children want, as well as what business is telling us that we need, is really important. Perhaps I'll hand over to Councillor Hayden around the lobbying question.
Yes, it's a very good point about the fact that especially children and young people where English is not their first language, in terms of integration, in terms of accessing everything they need to access. We all know that, you know, having a good command of the English language is central. So I think it's a really good point that it crosses over the departments, doesn't it? Both within the council, but within government as well. So I will take that up with colleagues, both here and in London as well. Thank you.
Subject to colleagues agreeing, it may be something that a joint letter can go on this. Just to flag, and I've got 5 speakers. I'm not going to be able to take any more because of the timings on this, I'm afraid. What I am going to propose at the end, just a heads up, this is clearly a very, very significant issue facing our city in a very short space of time. We have vacated a working group on youth services, but it seems to me we absolutely need to be looking at this as a working group. So my suggestion is that we bring this so we can spend some very significant time looking at what the plans are to address what seems to me, based on what colleagues and professionals are telling us around the table, to be a ticking time bomb in terms of post-16 provision. 2026 will be here in a blink of an eye. And so I think that my suggestion is we absolutely look at this within that vacated working group space that we had, which will give us the freedom to go into some real depth about solutions. Colleagues, just so you know, I've got Helen, Jules, Ray, Ryan, and then Tim, who initiated this piece, for a last word. But as I said, my suggestion is we bring this as a working group. Colin, I will let you bring, but what I would urge, can we please focus on what this agenda item is about, which is the imminent situation. So it was absolutely right, Julie, that you gave us the context, but I am going to be quite robust. We're focusing on what is happening in the next couple of years and what the plan is to attack and address that. Colin.
I'll be brief, Chair, and to the point. So to cover the 3 questions, for English for speakers of other languages, we had waiting lists this summer. We'll have waiting lists next summer for 16 to 18-year-olds. Without additional capacity, those waiting lists will grow significantly in summer 2026. We also have significant waiting lists for adults for ESOL provision as well. For the question about SEND, we have in Leeds City College about 800 students with specific high needs. We have far more with SEND needs, but with specific high needs, we have about 800. We do have specialist provisions such as the Vine, which is oversubscribed. But one key thing to note is that, and this is common across the further education sector, the proportion of students with high needs and with educational health and care plans in mainstream further education is far higher than it is in the school sector. So a general lack of places in further education will have a significant impact on young people with SEND needs because they're moving from specialist to mainstream as they move into post-16 education. And the third point really quickly is, I think there was a question about different communities. I'll just make one point. If we take the index of multiple deprivation, then there's currently about 23–24% of young people in Leeds who sit in postcodes with the 10% highest deprivation. The proportion that Leeds City College has is double that. That's just how the system works. We just have a far higher proportion. It'll be the same in Leeds College building. We have a far higher proportion from the most deprived areas of the city. So if we don't have enough provision, it's very clear the students and the young people who are going to struggle to get places more than anybody else.
Thank you for that. Helen.
And my question was on workforce. I just wondered whether there'd been any research on whether there's the workforce to provide this provision, because obviously in education across the board there's a big recruitment and retention problem. Is there the workforce to teach these children?
Happy to come in the first instance, but there's colleagues around the table who are much more experienced than me in terms of working in education settings in children, so I'll hand over to them as well. But I suppose just to say that it is a real live discussion at the moment. I don't think we're there. You know, we've had a conversation, you know, about potential duplication. You know, again, we've probably all got workforce strategies, workforce development training packages within our own organisations. I don't think we have that as joined up as we might have across the city, and in particular for those children who do have additional needs. So we've got a way to go on it, I think, is the answer, but we're absolutely committed, and those conversations are live. We actually have got an event coming up in the east of the city, which is really reimagining in some ways the children's system, you know, not just children's social care, but within that education. You know,
Sorry,
I'm drafting off, so I'm going to hand over to Colin.
Thank you. Can maybe, Nikki, Colin, can you maybe speak to that, because you're particularly on the coalface of this bit?
Yeah, the teacher recruitment is a crisis in FE, and it's particular in certain areas. So just looking at construction with the breadth of that, there would be certain subject areas that we would really struggle to recruit teachers for. Because of the wage inflation within construction, we lose people back into industry. And obviously there's a massive skill shortage in construction, so they are in demand. So that draw back into the technical area is where we lose our staff to. So we would have to look at it on almost a occupation by occupation basis as to where we could feasibly grow and where we know we can recruit the teaching staff. The concern is that we need to recruit teaching staff in areas such as electrical, in bricklaying, and those are hard to recruit areas, but are absolutely vital to meeting the government priorities.
Can I just say, it just seems like that's where we need some more lobbying and continue to lobby government, because we really need those people at the, not the chalk face literally, but in those positions.
Just very briefly, I'd echo what Nikki says. It's a real challenge, but the bigger challenge is space at the moment. So where we've got difficulties recruiting staff, we use quite innovative and imaginative processes, and I'd like to make it a lot easier for us, but we do get there in terms of staffing everything. Our bigger problem at the moment is space.
Thank you. Ray.
I worked on lifelong learning for 5 years, being the ability project worker for 5 years. So I have a question about when people go from level 2 to level 3, which is not identified here. What is the dropout rate? Because they appeared to, and we did extensive research with a major employer in Hull about this. What is done to make sure that that level remains at the minimum it possibly can? Because we were seeing levels of about 25% dropout. Is that still the case? What is the dropout rate between 2 and 3, and what is being done to make sure that these pupils are given the best opportunity to achieve what they need to achieve, and but maximum support is there? So that's a question for the providers.
So dropout, in any sense of the word, is a major priority for us. So student progression, and the specific question was about progression between level 2 and level 3. We do spend a huge amount of time making sure that students are retained between level 2 and level 3. We also, it's not just retaining in education, because we have a number of students who have spent 2 or 3 years to get to level 2, and actually the right progression is into work then. So we work on that as well. It's a huge priority for us to make sure that wherever students are progressing to, it becomes either into higher education when they leave further education, or into work. And we're pretty successful at it, so it's hard work, but yeah, it is a massive focus for us. Did that answer the question?
No, what I actually was after is what is the dropout rate? That's what I was after. What rate of students actually drop out of education when they move from level 2 to level 3? That's what I'm asking.
That would be quite a complex answer. It's not a simple thing to answer because students finish at level 2 and then choose to move on to level 3 or choose to move into work. So the simple fact that they completed a level 2 and didn't enrol on a level 3 isn't defined as a dropout. So I'd struggle to give you a straightforward answer because there isn't one really.
I will say just some lived experience. I'll be very cautious to anonymise this, otherwise I'll be in trouble. But I am aware of a young person who started at Leeds City College on a level 3. It may as well have been in a foreign language, although it wasn't. And actually what the college did was support her into a level 1 course with a view to the following year, having then secured the language and the concepts around that course to then move on to a level 2. So recognising that there was a challenge, an outcome and a progression opportunity, actually supported the young person through that process. So my lived experience is that the setting works incredibly hard to support young people to remain within a learning context. So that's my own experience. Jules.
Colin, you said that the biggest challenge is space at the moment, and I want to come back to something that Kelly said, where you're talking about needs. And one of the things that you said is, you talked about what young people want is that hyper-local provision. Is that is something that they asked for, yeah? So my question is, why have Leeds City College spent the last few years closing all those local sites that we had around the city and centralising everything into that new building in the city centre when we get told as councillors people want that local provision? Kelly's just said that young people in that situation are wanting that hyper-local provision. We've now got a challenge with space, but all those local sites that we had around the city have been closed and moved into this central provision in the city centre, which people don't want to come to because they want to access provision locally, and we get told that as councillors. So I'd like to know why, because this is obviously one of the issues now where we have lack of space, and I'd like to know why that's happened and why we haven't been listening to the young people who want that hyper-local provision, which hopefully they would attend and would solve some of these problems.
Okay, I'll give a direct response. So I've been in the city at Leeds City College or Luminate since 2015. I can't recall anything that's closed whilst I've been here that's local. What?
Rothwell, Horsforth.
Rothwell's open again. We reopened it.
Horsforth.
Okay, that wasn't really a closure. The site was completely worn out, so we moved away from the site. So but we have centralised, yeah. So can I move on to? Yeah.
Sorry. You've been there since 2015. Before that, there was lots of sites, and they've closed, and now we've got this central. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just want to put it in context.
But it has happened, and that's what I want to know why that's happened.
I accept that historically, but it is quite a long time ago, there was a lot of community-based education sites. Again, I'm going to be fairly clear about it. There is a need for local provision to re-engage with young people, but I don't think it's necessarily the case that, well, firstly, when we're providing specialist courses, we need specialist provision, and it's pretty much impossible to put that repeatedly all over the city. Our experience as well is, whilst there are some people who want to stay local, most young people do want to travel in to that specialist provision.
Okay, just one suggestion. Rather than develop that huge big campus in the city centre, we could have rebuilt Horsforth or rebuilt other sites around the city to give that local provision. Just an idea, just something I wanted to just. But what I'm interested in is listening to what young children are saying, what young people are saying, who want to access that provision, and that is that hyper-local provision.
A lot of the provision that students access is specialist provision, and in the end, it's not economic to reproduce it all over the city. We just wouldn't have enough money to do it, basically.
Yeah, just to come in on that point, really, I think what we probably need is a balance, and I think we are reviewing this as a partnership to ensure that we've got that balance. I would just say I had the privilege of going out to the City College probably about 12 months ago, and I met with a group of children 14 to 16 who had not been able to cope in school and would have been out of school had they not have been in that provision. And I sat there and my mouth was open as I was listening to them, and I was looking around the table thinking, you are all children who've been identified as having additional needs, complex needs, and yet you are the entrepreneurs of the future. You know, and the fact that, you know, for a host of reasons, and this is not me being critical, this is just where we are in 2025, that as a system we've not been able to support you to maintain, you know, in mainstream provision, is the issue that we have got to solve, because they were talented, articulate, you know, they were the young people of the future. So there's absolutely, and I think there is something about, you know, we talked here about travel training, we've talked here about independence. You know, children are going to have to, if we want them to be active citizens and be able to access the city centre and everything that we have to offer, there is something about that independent travel. Having said that, we're also in conversations at the moment. You know, we've got some fantastic local provision, Catch, third sector, out in the east of the city, supported by Luminate and others. You know, we do need to be developing the best practice as well across the city. And that's where, when we're talking about spaces, when we're talking about places, we are thinking outside the box in terms of what we want that provision to look like and what we want it to be in 2026.
Just to add one final thing about the new places that have come into the city, and the independent training providers are specifically working in those local community areas to develop provision, but actually by linking in with local partners that are already established and developing clear progression pathways. So we do employability and re-engagement, for example, at entry in level 1 in the community, and then support those young people to move into the technical level 2 programmes and then on to level 3. And apprenticeship provision that Kelly's talked about earlier.
I think it's important also just to note that we're not capturing all the voices that were around the table. I'm thinking of organisations like Learning Curve, obviously, who have setting both in the city centre and in Harrogate, which particularly young people from North Leeds access, and Lighthouse as well, who have a post-16 provision. Of course, with specialist provision for children with young learners with additional needs. Ryan.
Thank you. On paragraph 11, the reference is made to the new Delta Academy sixth form at the Springs in Colton. Is that going to be just level 3, or is it a mix of level 1 to 3 provision?
My understanding when I spoke to Delta Academy was that their plan was for A-level provision. They may have changed. It was over a year ago when I spoke to them, Councillor Stevenson.
That was my understanding. I think I'm right in saying their plan is to close their sixth form provision at Garforth and move it across. So in terms of net numbers, I'm not sure what impact it has. But I do know this is a DFE funded project, which, although the DFE are reviewing all the free school funding, this one was set aside not for review, with lobbying from the council. I think it's interesting that we're plowing more money into level 3 where we're saying there's not a capacity issue, whilst begging for money for level 1 and 2. So the question is, in your figures where you say there's sufficient capacity in the system, does that include the uplift you're predicting from Delta? And what is that uplift if they're shutting Garforth and just relocating it?
So I'm not privy to the very detailed information because I had a higher level conversation, but the talk is about picking up the sixth form provision from Garforth, moving it to Colton Springs. That would include some level 2 provision which they currently offer health and social and hair and beauty at level 2. So there is some of that, and they weren't of a mind to close it when I had the conversation with them. the numbers around capacity for 2030 would include the additional places at Delta. But as I say, I tried to get the DFE details and they weren't available to me.
Sorry. Yeah, just to come in on the back of that, I think to mention the fact that because this is so complex and because the responsibilities sit across so many different organisations, it's the partnership in the city which is the place where we can seek to kind of reconcile and converge all these different issues. Councillor Stevenson, the inference I draw from your question is why is there an increase in investment in level 3 when we are saying clearly that level 2 is the priority? And it's for us to use the opportunity of our partnership forum to influence the decision makers who aren't in this room around essentially developing provision that we know that we need. And so that conversation increasingly is being joined up. I can't speak to what the DFE will or won't do or has or hasn't decided in the past, but I think we've got the structures in place to reduce the potential for that sort of thing happening into the future.
Can I just come in with a kind of general and historical view that the national system for planning post-16 pretty much doesn't exist. And whilst the DFE historically over the past 10 years or more have invested in individual projects, there's been very little, if any, consultation with local authorities or combined authorities about what's needed before those projects are funded. So if you look at all the projects in the pipeline or have been completed recently, there would have been virtually no consultation with Leeds City Council or West Yorkshire Combined Authority about what was needed, because there simply hasn't been an effective planning system for post-16. What we're doing now is we've got a strong strategic partnership and we're talking directly to the DFE in order to resolve that and make sure that we do provide collectively a position with the DFE for them to plan going forward. But that system's been broken for a long time, and it goes all the way back to a change in legislation which was intended to put post-16 funding through local authorities. That legislation remained in place, although the subsequent, and it was the coalition government, I think, that changed the decision so that the funding didn't come through local authorities, but nobody changed the legislation. So we've got a national position where there is the responsibility legally in one place, that's with local authorities, and all of the power and all of the funding sitting centrally with the DFE, and very little links between those two things.
Thank you. Helen, yeah, you should just come in.
Thank you. No, I'm trying to behave properly. Yes, absolutely. Well, Colin said, I don't officially know anything about Delta building anything in the, which is essentially in my ward. There's no planning permission gone in, there's no, so I'm relying on this brilliant team working in partnership around the city, because anybody can apply to the DFE for anything, and they're going to apply for A-levels because that's where the money sits. That's where the extra funding, that level of funding is much, much higher. So, and if you're going to, now, because of the work that the partnership has done, there is, especially if Garforth is closing, there will be that need, and the DFE has confirmed that there will be the need for level 3 A-level courses out in the east. But we have all the responsibility, and I will go and beg for this city. I don't like the word begging, but I was prepared to do it for what's best for this city. But I really wish that I didn't have to do so over the last 10 years.
And it will be hopefully something obviously that can be changed. So, okay. Thank you, colleagues. Tim, very, very brief last thought before I turn to the recommendations.
Okay, thanks, really useful input. Just a very specific thing. Obviously, nationally and locally, we have seen a decrease in HE numbers, particularly overseas students. I don't need a detailed answer, but I just want to check that local HE providers have been included in the discussions. Perhaps they might be able to provide some temporary provision in terms of space.
The universities are part of our 14 to 19 partnership group, so they're fully informed, and we do talk to them. We have asked them for delivery space and not been successful in persuading them yet.
Liking the growth mindset. Equally mindful, of course, as I kind of alluded to, we have young people in the north of the city that will access Harrogate. There'll be young people accessing, I dare say, Bradford provision as well. And in certain areas that may feature in terms of ongoing capacity. It's not a question. I'm just...
No, but can I come in? Because,
of course, yeah.
Yeah, because the problem we have in Leeds, well, it's not a problem, it's lovely. I want as many people to come into Leeds, but we have people from Wakefield, Calderdale, Kirklees, Bradford and Harrogate all coming in to access learning places in Leeds as well.
See, Helen, where great minds think like... that was the next part of my sentence. I was about to say, and of course the contrast to that, but so you saved me a sentence, thank you. Okay. We have some proposals that I'm going to tweak as we go along slightly. So the first thing, using the training that I sat through the other day, we don't just note the contents of the report. I would propose that we note and agree with the contents of the report, recognise that the work the local authority and partners are doing within the post-16 partnership, working on the post-16 capacity over the past 18 months and looking to the future. Can I propose that we set up a working group to look at this urgently and pick up some of the themes and issues that have come out of this morning's report and to see what the action plan is to address this, both short and medium term. I think long term really picks up the points that Julie was making, and you talked to that strategy. But short and medium term, i.e. 18 months up to 60 months. And might I propose a joint letter from this board together with the executive member to specifically address some of the wider issues, particularly the issue on urgent capacity and space that are going to be a requirement and the funding that we will need for that. So I propose that. Does anybody want to tweak any of that? No. And Oliver, are you happy to second that? Thank you very much. All in favour? Any against? Colleagues, thank you very much. So this, just before we get to agenda item 8, I mentioned in the working group, in the pre-meeting, that, sorry, I'm just going to interrupt that. Can I just say a huge thank you to our guests for that last item that really helped drive us forward on that. So huge thank you to Colin. And can I say a good luck for next week? I know we don't do good luck for Ofsted, but good luck next week for Ofsted. I have no doubt they will be blown away by everything that Leeds City College does. I know I am on a daily basis. So thanks, Colin. Thanks, Nikki. Thanks, Kelly and Andrea. Thanks all. Before we move on to the next substantive item, as I mentioned in the pre-meet, I have to go away at 12:15. I have a wedding in Gateshead to attend, at which point I will wish a mazel tov to Gabriella and her Hossen. So I am going to vacate the chair at 12:15. As I mentioned in the pre-meet, I propose that Ryan Stevenson, Councillor Stevenson, takes over the chair at that point. I propose that. Someone content to second that? Thank you. to be loved. All in favour? Any against? That's carried. Thank you very much. So I will literally vacate the chair and Councillor Stevenson will kindly take over the remaining items wherever they may be at that point. Thank you, colleagues. So item 8, bereavement support services. This is an item that's a request from Councillor Stevenson. It's just going to be a short item and then a determination whether this is something that needs looking at further. Councillor Stevenson, do you want to speak to, or consent for officers, just to crack on? Okay, colleagues, officers, or whoever wants to kick off.
Yeah, thank you,
Thanks,
Chair.
Helen.
So this paper is about the Child Bereavement Support Service contract. So as part of the budget setting process for 24-25, the Council had to consider delivering a range of savings from its commissioned services. This paper outlines the decision not to renew the Children and Families Bereavement Service contract. As the report sets out, this is not a judgment on the value or performance of the service, which was excellent. This is a difficult decision driven by significant financial pressures faced by the Council, which is projected to save £500,000 annually. The needs of children and young people will continue to be met by organisations like Child Bereavement UK, who will still provide a level of service in the city, including face-to-face support. Other services available include Mindmate Wellbeing, Cooth, SEMH Third Sector offers, and the Leeds CAMS Crisis Call line. We're exploring opportunities of joint working with other services to enhance the network of support services for those affected by bereavement, and as our public health colleagues are also committed to reviewing and refreshing the bereavement pathway to ensure it meets current needs. You know, on a personal level, I mean, I'm determined. I'm absolutely, absolutely determined. And I think many of you around this table know my own personal loss of my niece at the age of 6, which will be 5 years ago in April, and the significant trauma that brings on families, but particularly children that are close to when they lose a significant child in their lives. So I am determined, despite the significant budgetary challenges, that we retain our focus on being a trauma-informed city. The trauma that losing someone, be it an adult or a child in your life, has on children is immense and can be multifaceted. And we will continue to collaborate with our partners, of which there are many in the city. And that's what I really want to focus on, is having a look just what out there. In terms of our family, candlelighters were amazing and continue to be amazing in supporting our family after a child bereavement. So, and we'll remain focused on maintaining and further developing comprehensive support for children and families. Thank you, Chair.
No. Colleagues, anybody? Ryan, thank you.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you for allowing this to come to scrutiny. I think just by way of background, the reason I requested this was a key decision that came through notified to members some time ago, and I had dialogue with officers at the time to understand a bit more about it, because I know we'd had some discussions previously. An indication was given at that time that it would be subject to call-in, so members could have a view. Things then moved on, and the decision slightly changed, so therefore there was no call-in rights. And I just felt, because of the importance of us discussing it before, it ought to come here just for us to ask a few questions on it. So the first bit, I had 3 questions just to understand, set the context first, Chair, which was just, this proposal was initially put forward to make a saving of £136,000 in this current financial year, 24-25. So could officers just explain what the financial saving in this current financial year will be now the decision's proposing to be made?
Yes, Chair. Because we're not taking the decision to early terminate the contract, there will be no financial saving in the current year, but the full year saving next year will accrue on the basis that there won't be a recommission.
Which, from a scrutiny point of view, Chair, gets me to the crux of the point. This was initially floated in the last budget of Council as broadly commissioned services with a headline figure. And the process then that follows is that officers go away and bring up a group of contracts they might want to, or they can make savings from, and we never see them again as decision makers, having voted for a budget, unless it comes forward as a key decision, which was initially proposed. But that saving has to be made. So what this is actually about now is a financial saving in the next budget, which we are yet to vote on. Now, I would have thought the correct route to make those decisions would be for this to be in the budget items as a separate line for us to discuss at budget working group for the next year, and also crucially to vote on at council and for amendments to be laid if necessary. So I just want the board, myself and the board, to get their heads around why is the decision made as a key decision, not subject to scrutiny, to end this contract in order to save money next year, and for it not to be in the formal budget setting process that's subject to consultation, scrutiny and member involvement.
Chair, just for the benefit of the board, the situation in relation to the budget is each year members will set a budget. That budget will include a series of savings. The overwhelming majority of those savings are recurring savings, and they appear as recurrent savings. So if you make a saving in one year, the budget assumes that that saving will be made in the future years. It is effectively taken out of the base budget allocation. Where that's not likely to be the case, you may see one-off savings referred to in the budget, and they will be particular savings for 1 year only. That's the situation in relation to this saving, which was an element of a bigger aggregated saving of commissioned services savings that was going to be delivered, which was agreed at 1.2 million. As Councillor Stevenson points out, there has been some slippage in that, partly as a result of this one, but to be honest, partly as a result of other areas where, you know, we might not have hit that saving in totality, but that is then encapsulated in the budget position that's presented to members throughout the year, and you'll know that that's regularly reported to members through Executive Board.
This is not it might be accurate, it's not reality though. It's not recurring saving because you haven't made the saving in the last budget. It hasn't realised, has it? So it's a new, and you had made no decision. The decision is to cease the contract and make the saving in the next financial year. Nothing materialised in the current financial year. So the question really is, why is this not in the budget papers that we've just scrutinised for the next financial year as a saving, when the decision you are going to make is purely to make that saving next year, not this year?
Yeah, Chair, the £1.2 million saving is in the budget. It was agreed in the budget. I'd have to check absolutely the wording of the budget resolution, but the budget resolution is generally along the lines that approval is granted for the proposal, and for that proposal be to consulted upon and then enacted, and then the inaction of that decision is relative to the value of that decision, whether it be an officer decision or whether it needs to come somewhere else. That's the reason why this came back initially as a key decision, because we thought the implication of an early termination of a contract would be a key decision. As we undertook that consultation, it was very clear that there were significant benefits being derived from the service, and so we felt as officers that it wasn't the appropriate action to early terminate the saving, which so therefore the key decision effectively fell away because we weren't going to early terminate it. The reality though is this commission service was coming to an end, and therefore we had never got to a position where we had said that we would recommission the service, although the financial implication of that would be realised. So therefore there was no decision to be taken because the service was going to come to an end. If we'd have recommissioned the service, I think it would have been appropriate for us to come back and said we are now going to cease the service, but that wasn't the case because we hadn't recommissioned it, and the decision to not undertake the early termination reflected the feedback that we got from the consultation.
So long as it's not on the same point, because I think you're right. You might not like the answer, but to my mind, it's been comprehensively answered.
No,
so you can ask your last
fine.
question.
We just disagree on the process.
Sure.
So moving on, I asked for an email to be circulated to all board members, which just set out from Child Bereavement UK what they had provided in previous years for the service. I asked it to be circulated for information, just because I was going to ask a quick question on it, which is in the report. There's reference made to other alternatives being considered, and the language used is that's Councillor Hayden just reiterated that's a live conversation, and the concern from families and those employed in the sector is that it's almost cart before horse. We're making a decision without knowing what the landing place is. So I guess what I'm looking for is some security in that we know, once this decision is made, we know what it's going to look like next year and what exactly that service is going to be, and before the decision is made. And with that in mind, given the data in the email that was circulated, around 271 individual families being supported, works out about £500 a family, over 1,000 support sessions, about £115 a session. Can you give us some confirmation that wherever you land with what the new support might look like, it is going to deliver the same outcomes as what has previously been provided in case of numbers? Or are we being frank and saying that actually the delivery of the service is going to be less than what it is now because we're removing the financial support for it, and being honest about that?
I think and I hope that we have been really honest and really transparent in every conversation that we've had about this service. I think the starting point, as has already had been said, is that we've got a statutory duty, statutory responsibility to propose a balanced budget. We all know, Scrutiny is really well aware of the huge, significant, unprecedented, 41 years this year I've been working with children and families, unprecedented savings that we have to make, not only as a local authority, but within that as a Children and Families Directorate. We've said here before, I've said here before, I didn't come into this work, I didn't come into this role to cut and reduce services in Leeds. That is, none of us would want to be making this decision. But the reality is I have to put savings proposals forward, you know, in order to meet a balanced budget, and that is my statutory duty, and you wouldn't expect me to do anything less, and I would absolutely be held to account if I didn't, and quite rightly so. So we've been really clear. This is in no way reflects the value, you know, in which we have put on this service and on other services that we've had to reduce and that we've had to cut. The reality is it's not going to be the same, and I am sorry about that, and I wish dearly that I were not having to sit today, you know, and say that and having to bring the savings proposal forward in the way that we have had. It's not going to be the same. We're not going to be able to deliver the same service that we did previously. We have had to look at our statutory duty and our statutory responsibilities to ensure that we have got effective help and protection for the children in the city. What the report does set out is, you know, a range of other services. You know, it's not a statutory responsibility to deliver the service, and really sadly it's the situation that we're in now financially that we've got to first of all protect our statutory services, our statutory responsibilities. I think it's really right and proper that I also highlight the you know, the support, you know, and the consensus in the city to protect where we can early help and early intervention and prevention services. And again, we've done that and we've maintained that and we continue to do that. But we can't protect them all in the current financial climate. So we've had to make some really difficult decisions. What the report, I think, really clearly sets out is the range of other services which will continue to exist in the city to support children and families who are suffering loss and bereavement. It's an area that we will continue, you know, as with any area, you know, we'll continue. I think at the previous conversation, demonstrates a previous agenda item, to work as a partnership where we've got issues, where we've got gaps, where we've got challenges, to try and be creative. So as an example, the LSCP, again, recognising that loss and bereavement is an issue, is an ongoing issue for children and families in the city, that we have commissioned as an LSCP exec from the UK Bereavement Service a number of webinar sessions for the workforce right across the city. So that's colleagues within children and families, within the voluntary sector, within our schools, to upskill the workforce in terms of issues around bereavement and loss and how best to support children and families who are suffering bereavement and loss. That's going to be supported with a range of tools which will be available to practitioners right across the city. And there'll be a number of videos, I think 5 videos, which will be made again, which will be disseminated right across the city. I'm not saying for 1 minute, that that is going to replace the absolute exact service that Child UK were delivering. But I suppose I'm going somewhere, I hope, to show that where we are able, to think creatively, think differently, to continue to support children where this is an issue, we are. But the reality is we're having to make some very, very difficult decisions, and this is one of them.
Just a simple request, and Chair, to close off my questions, please. Nobody's questioning the difficulty, and I know from personal conversations they're difficult decisions to make. But our job is to scrutinise. So just for clarity, in the report it sets out that when you reviewed all the non-statutory commission services, and they had to make a decision to cut some of them. So can you circulate to us the list of those that were considered in the review? I think it's important for us as elected members to know which ones the decision was made to cut child bereavement over another, and it's important for us to know what those others were in order to question. Thank you, Chair.
I'm really happy to do that, and I hope that we're really clear about the value that we place on scrutiny, and what that brings to the service. So I'll be very happy to do that.
Thank you. And Rob, you're perfect. Thanks. Ray.
I think it's worth me, and I don't like doing this, but I am going to do it. My father died when I was 10. That immediately meant that my mother had very little money, worked 3 jobs. But fortunately, she had a widow's allowance that she was able to change for me. I would point out some of the crocodile tears that I hear from the opposition party around this. I find rather obscene, because now widow's allowance is paid for 18 months. It's not paid for till the person is 16. The biggest barrier to me was always a lack of money that my mother was able to generate. I started work at 15 simply because to generate a second income. So I find this a difficult conversation, and that's been, in fact, I'm quite upset that I'm having to do this, if I'm being absolutely honest. So I find this incredibly difficult, but I am sure we will find a way to make people have the correct support. I'm confident in that by the people who sat at that top table, and I thank you for that. But the fact remains that what has happened, thanks to the last previous government, is we have thrown some people under the bus, and that is the truth, and that's how I feel about it.
Thank you, Councillor Jones, and thank you for that personal insight, and I thank you for your bravery, and it will continue to affect you for the rest of your life, and that's why I am, and you have my absolute guarantee that I will look, and I have this fantastic team that support me and actually do the work, because I don't actually do anything, and we'll look across the city at where we have the support for children who are bereaved, and what that support looks like, and where the gaps are, and we'll spend the next year working with public health colleagues, as I said in the introduction, to try, and because it's a public health issue as well, and a mental health issue, as well as all the other issues that you brought in, and we will work out over the next year to just do that map of the city and see where we can fill it and what we can do to address these concerns, because it's a real priority for me as well.
I will bring Shanaz in a second. It's not my job to defend Councillor Hayden by any stretch, but the suggestion that you don't actually do anything is respectfully somewhat nonsense, and therefore, while I won't officially strike it from the record, it's just... So in the event that anybody should ever feel like quoting you from in a future meeting, perhaps you now have the ability to quote me immediately after I throw down that gauntlet to anyone. Shanaz.
Thank you, Chair. I don't envy you at all. It is a really, really tough decision. I completely empathise with you. And I know my third sector colleagues have discussed their concerns with the service not being recommissioned. But I think my question is, what consideration has been given to provide a service to the more culturally diverse communities? Because the organisations that were mentioned in there, I don't see them to have any experience in directly dealing with more culturally diverse communities. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that goes back in some ways to the point that I made about the LSCP and the LSCP executive, recognising that this is a priority for us. It is an issue that we know does affect a lot of children and families in the city, and families from a range of different diverse backgrounds. So certainly when we're looking at the workforce development that I've just talked about, so the webinars, when we're looking about those practice toolkits, when we're looking about the videos, that absolutely will have a focus on the different needs, and there will be different needs, cultural needs, experience needs, different family needs that make the loss and bereavement for individual children feel very, very different. I think it's a really helpful challenge. I think it's the purpose of Scrutiny, for you to remind us of the need to do that this morning, and we absolutely will.
Thank you. I'm really sorry. I'm going to draw a line. I'm going to draw a line under this item here. Sorry, I'm conscious of we've given it. Yeah.
Can I just say that as far as from the global majority, I think it's really important that she be given the opportunity to answer that specific question.
Respectfully,
Please.
The director has spoken, and I have to make sure we also work to a time frame. So I am drawing a line under the item, and I'm going to leave it there. We're going to take a 5-minute comfort break because we've gone on a blast. Okay, colleagues, thank you. 25-26. Who is... Jordan, are you kicking off?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about Agenda 8. I think that how that was handled was pretty poor, Chair. In the pre-meeting, I was going to bring up that I was concerned that there wasn't enough time to properly talk about it, and I just feel like other people wanted to talk. Our co-opted member brought it up and then didn't have a chance to respond. I just have to bring it up. I don't think that was fair how that was dealt with. At the beginning, I thought I wanted time to be given to that agenda, but I thought actually we might be able to get through it, and it seemed like that was going to happen. But it just seems like it was cut really short. So I do have an issue with how that was handled, and I think it's probably important in a public meeting that should be talked about. Thank you.
Thank you. Your comments are noted. I always take up, I am far from perfect, as though I may try to be. I equally have, the room has to be vacated by 1:30. It is now 11:45 and we have a number of really substantive items. It was an additional item, and therefore I took the view as chair that having been given a substantive item to a question raised, that it was time to move on. It's always open there's always a judgment call to be made, and the challenge of sitting here is I sometimes have to make a difficult judgment. If I got it wrong, then I apologise, and I certainly apologise. I never intend to cause offence to officers or members, but sometimes sitting here, I've got to make a call so that we can cover everything in the agenda while there's still a room available to us. And I am mindful at 1:30 there is a meeting taking place in this room. Ollie.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, can I back up what Councillor Bowden said? I think it would be really helpful for us to revisit this. I think it would be helpful for officers to have time to prepare this, and I think that Shanaz's question was a really important one. There are a whole load of issues here which I think need proper scrutiny. I'm mindful of time, as we all are, but this is an important issue, and I think we all need time as members to consider all of the relevant information, and officers need time as well to properly address it.
I am delighted that the item on the child bereavement service comes back as a substantive item, if that's what colleagues wish. I'm more than... Yeah. Okay. So, fine. Can we make sure that that comes back at the March meeting? So we'll have that as a substantive item, agenda item. I was conscious it wasn't supposed to be a substantive item. It was a brief report on request. Effectively, it was, but colleagues clearly want to look at that in greater depth. I think that's absolutely right. Is everyone comfortable with that? And again, I formally apologise if anybody's was offended. Certainly, I meant no offence to Farah in any way, shape or form. I realised there were things she wanted to say, but I'm mindful that we have to move the agenda on, otherwise we won't finish today. Anything else on that before we do move on? Did we need to, we voted on just how we're going to take it forward, bring it back as a substantive agenda item. So formally move that we bring it as a substantive item, ideally at the next meeting. Someone happy to second that? I'll second that. All in favour? Anyone against? Thank you. Shanaz, just so you know, we've agreed that we're going to actually bring the child bereavement services as a substantive item at the next meeting. We'll actually focus, if we can have one of the focuses, the point that Shanaz raised as well, this particular issue. Okay, thank you all. Thank you for that, and thank you for making sure that we've dealt with that appropriately. Colleagues, item 9. Rob, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, just to provide the Constitution framework and the budget and policy framework elements to this, and also to cover off the working group in terms of a brief summary, just to bring it into the public meeting. So under the budget and policy framework, Scrutiny is a required consultee on the budget proposals for the forthcoming financial year. This is a two-strand approach, one of which is the public meeting today, But the earliest strand is the working group that we did on the 16th of December, which is a private session to enable members to have more detailed consideration of forthcoming proposals. The ultimate conclusion of that work will be a composite statement, as we call it in Scrutiny, which is a statement from all 5 boards that goes to the February Executive Board, which this year is on the 12th of February. So the findings of both the working group, and I'll briefly talk to that in a moment, and this session will feed into a report that goes to Executive Board for a response. And then ultimately to full council. So just briefly, Chair, if you don't mind, the working group covered a number of points, and I'll very briefly summarise. I'm conscious of the time that you've mentioned. So there was some quite detailed discussion of the systemic issues within the sort of the national system, if you like, on SEND funding and children looked after funding. That was a key theme. There was a discussion on the sufficiency of the budget for the forthcoming year based on the in-year difficulties that have experienced. There was also consideration of the children's centres review, which I think was a proposal in previous year's budget. So that came out as a theme just to ensure that was a robust set of proposals. And there was also some focus on the turnaround grant, which is in the youth justice system, and that was just a query around whether that will continue into the forthcoming financial year. National insurance was also raised, the employees' national insurance issue, and members were provided with more information on that in advance of this meeting, just from colleagues in the Directorate. And then lastly, Chair, there was this talk of digital change and how that may assist the streamlining and modernising of systems moving forward. I think that, in brief, summarises the working group on the 16th of December. Thanks, Chair.
Colleagues, Julie.
Actually, just before Julie comes in, I'm really sorry, Julie. And thank the whole team for the ongoing work on the budget. It's, difficult. But just on the turnaround that Rob's just mentioned, it has been extended for 25-26. And I have met with, and I will meet again with Minister Nick Dakin on the turnaround in the youth justice system for in terms of the longer period and going forward. But just to confirm, it has been extended. We don't know how much yet, but it has been extended. Thank you. Julie.
Thank you. I'll keep it brief, Chair. Just to say, really, as I've already said, that it's very difficult. We've had to make some very difficult decisions. What I would highlight, though, and I think it's really important because I think it's what Leeds is about, that whilst we're having to put forward a number of savings proposals, we've also had a number of invest-to-save proposals accepted throughout the year, and that's recognising that we can't continue to salami slice and there not be an impact on our services and outcomes for children. So whilst we've had to make difficult decisions, we're also continuing to retain our ambition for children and families in Leeds and the services that we have to support them. I'm going to hand over to finance colleagues, if that's okay.
Thank you, Julie. Hi, I'm Lucy McCauley, Head of Finance, Supporting Children and Families. Just wanted to give you, by way of a budget summary included within the paper. So the overall council proposed net revenue budget for 25-26 is £656.8 million. This is an increase of £34.8 million from 24-25. In order to achieve this, the overall funding gap the council has had to meet is about £106 million for 25-26. Savings proposals totalling £37.3 million were presented to October's Exec Board, with a further £45.3 million in December. These savings were once again categorised as either business as usual or service review proposals. Savings proposals for the Children's and Families Directorate totaled £21.6 million across both the October and the December savings reports. I'm going to hand over to Phil.
Chair, realistically, I think it's whether you want me to do a brief run through of the proposals as they are. I'm cognizant that we did go through them at the working group, whether you want me to or whether you just want to move on to questions.
I think, as I say, we dealt with this in the working group in depth. So Rob's made sure to bring all of that into the formal meeting. So I'm quite content if colleagues are to go onto questions and any detailed examination, subject to anything else any colleagues have to add. Content to get? Okay, let's go on to questions, comments, observations, thoughts, queries.
Hello, thank you, Chair. So, in terms of the social care review, I think it's absolutely right what we're focusing on in terms of prevention, reuniting families, things like that. Given the cross-directorate proposal in the reduction of staff, cancelling vacancies and so on, how will this affect the ability of your work to carry out this and to really focus on this, and also the well-being of the staff as well?
Thank you. It's a really helpful question and a really pertinent question. We have got less people in the council, we have got less people in the directorate, and those people are doing more. We are really, really fortunate, and that your question gives me an opportunity to thank all of our colleagues across the directorate, but also all of our partners, because as a partnership we're all in the same situation, to be honest with you, in terms of the current financial challenges. We are so lucky in Leeds. I've worked in other local authorities, a number of other local other organisations across the UK. I've never met a more dedicated, passionate, committed group of people in my life that we have in Leeds, you know, both within the council, the directorate and the partnership. I suppose in some ways it comes back, you know, well-being is key to us, and as a senior leadership team, you know, it's a key priority for us to focus on throughout the year. You know, key to that is listening to our staff, listening to you know, colleagues. We do have, as an example, our staff survey, which is about to go out in the spring this year. Just one small example, you know, and we absolutely listen to the feedback that we get from staff and respond to that and take a you did, we said approach. You said we did approach. I think it also goes back to my earlier point about invest to save. So whilst we're having to put savings proposals forward, whilst we're having to cut some areas, we are also increasing capacity in others. So if I give you an example, you know, our reunification team, that was a relatively new team, and that was really aimed at identifying children who are in external residential placements, costly external residential placements, higher cost than ever before, poorer outcomes than ever before. We want our Leeds children back in Leeds because that's the right thing, and we know it'll get better outcomes. We established a reunification team. We began to see the success of that. You know, we've had 4 more now, but you know, back end of last year, 4 young people that had come back from external costly residential into our own small group living homes with a plan to reunification back to family. Right thing for children. You know, some of those children have been going missing, and were involved in child exploitation. We saw a reduction of that when they came back to Leeds, and some of those children are now back with family. A saving of, you know, for those children alone, £40,000 a week. So we've invested further in that reunification team, and we're expanding it. So whilst we're having to make difficult decisions, we also we know what works. You know, we've had a successful strategy around that, and where we're seeing innovation, which is getting better outcomes for children and positive impact on our finances, we are investing further in that. So it's a balancing act. But this, you know, equally, our staff are working really, really hard. They are doing more than probably they've ever done before, and continuing to get great outcomes for children and their well-being. You know, our duty, my duty of care to them is key.
Any other questions? Ryan.
Just a very technical one. On page 115, Appendix 2, it's a very small change, but on the inflation linked to electricity and gas tariffs, what inflation figure is used there? Is it to project and predict? Is it the one that the OBR revised up inflation after the budget? So are we using the higher figure or the lower figure? Just out of interest.
Chair, to be honest, I struggled to hear Councillor Stevenson. I think he's quite quiet today. Could you just refer to the particular paper, the page number, please, Councillor Stevenson?
115.
Appendix 2 at 115, yeah, and it's up the top with inflation, electricity and gas tariffs.
Right, so it's a query on the inflationary uplift that was in the budget paper itself, in which case can we remit to let you have that separately, because we'll have to go back to corporate colleagues to get what measure they used and which measure they applied.
And if ever there was a question as to whether elected members read the papers, there's a question that proves it. Just a couple of questions from me, if I may. Colleagues will have seen a key decision notice around educational healthcare plan and mechanisms to ensure that they are processed more quickly. I assume that in the fullness of time that is going to have a resource implication. How is that going to be managed? Because obviously it's not within what's budgeted, so some information around that would be really helpful. Obviously we don't know what that figure is, but would imagine it would be quite substantial. I have raised in previous years a question around reassurance of achievability of some of the challenges within the budget. What do we think is different in the coming 12 months that gives us more assurance that we've had previously that what we're setting out is achievable? Because colleagues will all be aware that it's been a substantial challenge for the directorate each year, and it must be thoroughly unpleasant for directors and deputy directors to be constantly firefighting. So what's different do you believe in the coming year that gives you assurance to say this year we think we've nailed it? I'll leave those questions there. Thanks.
I'll come back onto your second part of the question, and I'll come back to Phil to answer the initial part of that. Again, I know that I and the senior leadership have been really clear that it remains a challenge, for all the reasons that we've outlined at Scrutiny before, not least because of the national broken children's care system, within that particular focus on external residential placements and the costs of those, and also the SEND broken system that we do have nationally. So, there will, obviously conversations going on, responses going on at a national level to some of those national challenges, which will assist us. Locally, what gives me confidence is some of the work that we've been doing, in particular over the last 18 months or thereabouts, to focus on some of the individual challenges. We know that our greatest area of challenge in terms of the budget is around children looked after, and in particular children in external residential placements. Our sufficiency strategy is absolutely aimed at addressing that. As I've said, first and foremost, we want Leeds children back in Leeds, back with family, back in Leeds schools, back in the local community. So our expansion, as an example of our small group living homes, which are coming online in a really timely way now. The example that I've just given there, where we've been able to, evidence our ability to return Leeds children to Leeds. The fact that all of the work, and this is cross-corporate work, it's really, really important to say that. We're working with colleagues across the different directorates in a way that we've never done before. The delivery board that I chair is a cross-corporate delivery board, pulling in resources from right across the council, which is a very new way of us to work. The fact, as an example, that our fostering, so our recruitment activity around fostering, has meant that the back end of last year, we were seeing expressions of interest coming through from potential foster carers at a level that we've never, seen for a good while. And the fact that those early expressions of interest are then converting into foster carers who are actually being put forward for formal assessment gives me confidence. The fact that we're currently talking with our health colleagues, around developing more provision for children with the most complex needs. And it's not just about having more provision, having more homes. It's about, the ambition within that, about the quality of the service that's been delivered through those homes. So linking with the ICB and health as an example in a way that we've never done before. I could go on, but I hope that that just gives a flavour, I suppose, of some of the innovative practice and also, some of the very clear success measures that we're seeing in terms of those positive outcomes for children being reflected then in cost. The example that I gave of bringing 4 children back from Leeds and that being a financial, saving or reduction of £40,000 a week just for 4 children when we're looking to double our children's homes and beyond. I'll hand over to Phil to answer the other part of your question, Councillor Cohen.
So in relation to the resourcing requirement for EHCP assessment, Executive Board in December agreed that there would be a need for additional investment, and we've been working through what the scale of that additional investment will be required. Members will appreciate that's a complicated figure to get to because it is very much demand-led, but working with Dan and his colleagues, we now believe we have a figure that we're able to work with in relation to the totality of that resource. And then when we've now established that, the key now is to work out where does that resource come from. There's some resource already built into the medium-term financial strategy of about 700,000 that's already built into the strategy. We've been identifying other areas of funding that we can apply to that from activity that is currently undertaken, where we can pivot resource or whether we could use grant resource to substitute resources. So we would hope that we will be able to get to a position relatively soon where we know what the ask is, we know what the direct contribution to that ask will be. We then need to work out what is a coping strategy to whatever is that gap. I think we will have conversations with corporate colleagues around that gap in the first instance to see whether there is any assistance that can be given corporately to that. That is against the backdrop of still a challenging corporate position. And then when we've got all that wrapped up, we will build that into the ongoing monitoring of 25-26, which will carry on throughout the year.
Thanks for that, Phil. Sorry, your answer begs the question, do we have a figure in mind as to what the expectation extra is that we may need to find, ballpark?
I do have a figure, Chair. You know that I'm always nervous of giving figures until those figures have been finalised, because as soon as I give a figure, that figure becomes the number that everyone remembers. I think it's fair to say that given the complexity of demand and the increased level of demand, we are looking at a significant figure that will run beyond £1 million, probably beyond £2 million. But I would really want to try and finalise that number absolutely before sharing it in a forum such as this. More than happy when we have that number to share that with members outside the meeting and possibly some information as to how we think that we're going to fund that, if that's helpful. But I would want to finalise it first.
And I don't think I don't think anybody would want to put pressure on anyone to pluck a figure out of the air. But that's an additional pressure, isn't it?
It's an additional pressure that's not built into the medium-term financial strategy. I think the plan that we need to do is come up, how do we meet that pressure so it then doesn't crystallise as an additional pressure.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. Maria.
Thank you. It would just to pick up on something that Julie's just said about the children that are looked after and working hard to bring them back into families. Is more going to be invested to prevent them from going into care in the first place? And how would that look?
Absolutely, Maria. And how can I put it? This is the bit that warms my heart and warms our hearts within the Directorate, because for me, if we can't get our early intervention and prevention right and our early help right for children in the city, we're always going to have a pressure, you know, and first and foremost, it is about enabling children to stay with family and prevent family breakdown. So an example of that is family help, which we've touched on here before, and the very fact that following the Josh McAllister review, there is an expectation that local authorities develop a family help service. We've already got our early help services in Leeds. We're really lucky. So in relation to our clusters, as an example, and the funding that schools put into clusters and early help within the city, really in other local authorities, that's unheard of. We've got our early help hubs. We had 3. We've now expanded those early help hubs to 7. We've been able to identify that, you know, historically, for the number of years now, within those hubs, we have had domestic violence coordinators, substance misuse coordinators and mental health coordinators who've all been commissioned from the third sector. What we've added in now is SEND coordinators, because we hear from parents and carers who have children with more complex needs that one of the issues that they have is really navigating the system and understanding what's available, what's out there. So in response to that direct feedback, we're introducing SEND coordinators into those family hubs. In addition to that then, we are going to build on our restorative early support teams. So historically in the city, we've had restorative early support teams which have been made up of social workers and family support workers working together, really, you know, looking at when issues do emerge and challenges do emerge in families, trying to ensure that they don't escalate, you know, that actually social workers working alongside family support workers can work together, again, through schools and educational settings to de-escalate, to respond to need. So within our family help plan, we will be creating a number of family help teams, but we're working on the model of the restorative early support teams. Those restorative early support teams were evaluated a number of years ago by the University of Bedfordshire. And what that research showed was that in the areas where we had those teams, the number of children coming into care reduced significantly, because families where there was tensions and things were beginning to escalate, the teams could get in, work with the system, work with schools, work with the voluntary sector to meet the needs of those families. So our family help service will be built on the model that we know works through those restorative early support teams. The other thing to say is, you know, we're all in agreement, and as I think I've referenced earlier on in the meeting, we've got an event that we're planning in the east of the city to pull partners together to hear from parents, from carers, also our third sector, you know, around, you know, what's the vision in the city for family help? You know, the conversation that we had earlier on, you know, what do the children in 2025 and the families in 2025 need that perhaps is different today? So, you know, key to anything that we do has got to be the voice and the influence of children, parents and carers. But there's a lot of activity. And again, you know, there is the support for that nationally and locally. Thank you.
Can I just add, it's brilliant, all this early help stuff. And what about when it's too late for that? So, for example, if the children are on child in need, what's involved from there?
No, Maria, absolutely. And this is the bit that I find really, really exciting. Outcome or recommendation from the Josh McAllister review. What the Josh McAllister review recognised is we're having too many children, too many families who are subject, as an example, to assessments undertaken by social workers, statutory social workers, statutory assessments, which then actually result in no further action. So actually what's been achieved, in a sense, through that process, where we're perhaps assessing families, you know, having families involved in processes where perhaps they haven't been necessary and perhaps where they're not delivering the best outcomes. So what we do now have is the ability, because of changes at a national level, whereby historically a child who is subject to a child in need plan has had to have an individual social worker leading that plan. In future, that will no longer necessarily be the case, and actually we can have lead practitioners who are not necessarily social work qualified who will be leading that plan. You know, and again, it will be a multi-agency plan. And this is where we need to think differently, you know, about, I suppose, listening to the needs of parents and carers, working in partnership, working alongside and working as a system to de-escalate. So it's a very different way of thinking, you know, and it's very much about recognising parents as partners and carers as partners. And it is about rebalancing this. What we know is that 10% or thereabouts of children who become involved with social work really are children who have suffered deliberate abuse and neglect. The vast majority of children and families that we seek to support are children and families who are struggling in adversity. And those children and families need a really different approach, you know, to perhaps a statutory social work approach. And that's what we're going to be developing and delivering through our family help, you know, but building on the work that we've done and the evidence that we've gone through our restorative early support teams. But key to that is listening to the experience of parents and carers to say, actually, we've actually got an event on Monday, which I'm really, really looking forward to. And there's a number of parents and carers that it's actually here in Civic Hall that are coming to talk to us about their lived experience and to talk to us, I suppose, about the importance of what we call family valued and us as professionals valuing family and how we work with families as partners. And so we'll be hearing from them on Monday about actually what really made the difference for them, but actually what was really unhelpful. You know, was the practice actually which was not helpful? You know, is there things that we need to hear from them that we need to do differently? And I think, you know, I hope that event on Monday, I suppose, is an evidence here of our commitment to absolutely listening to the voice of those who've lived experience.
Thank you. Helen, anything to sum up on this?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. I think going back to that question about what's going to be different this year, and, you know, and kind of balancing the budget, I think what we've been hearing about and what gives me the confidence to say that we will do it this year is that this process has been going on for 18 months, 2 years. So decisions were made through previous budget are really now giving us the platform to be able to deliver those savings. And it's not, to me, the major benefit isn't about the monetary savings, although we need to do that in order to keep children safe in the city, and for them to thrive we need to be able to have a functioning budget. But these changes and this work actually brings better outcomes for children. So if you talk about bringing children back to the city that's been very expensive external residential care, that delivers savings, but it's also much better. And that is happening, and it's happening at pace. And I think the pace that has been happening for the last year or so has been extraordinary. I mean, Julie talks about other local authorities hoping to open one small children's home in the next 2 years. We're up to number 10 in the last year or so. So, you know, and delivers those funds. But it's also much, much better for those children and young people coming back to the city. But coupled with that, and harder to quantify, is the point that you made, Maria, is about all the work that is preventing children coming into care. Because we could do all this, but still not, still have the same high number of children looked after, because we've got more and more coming in. It's harder to quantify which children would have come into care and which wouldn't. That's harder to but it's absolutely fundamental to our reduction in children looked after figures, which has been extraordinary, especially given the national picture over the last 9 months. And it's testament to that work, because we are intervening at an earlier always have been, but we're much. The work is much more strategic, and stopping, and that stopping sounds very harsh, doesn't it? What we're actually talking about is keeping children within their families and with their communities, and that's the best possible outcome for any child. So it's and that work is and that goes into all that Julie has talked about, but also looking at parents as the word she talked about looking at parents as partners, because we know that risk to children has changed, and we have this pathway of risk outside the home, and actually our children are at risk and young people are at risk not necessarily from the family, who might be struggling, but struggling with circumstances outside the home that they need our help with, and we're struggling as well. So we all need to work in partnership to keep our children safe, and that is, and it's the most cost-effective way, but it's the best outcome for our children. So yeah, we're innovative, we're working really hard, and you know, so, and these savings will just keep, because what will happen is getting the best outcomes for children will mean that we are saving money down the line of very expensive inputs when things get to crisis point, that hopefully will not get to crisis point in a vast majority of cases. I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you.
Perfect place to leave it. Thank you, Helen. We have recommendations at page 36 of the report. So I move those recommendations. Anybody happy to second? Thank you, Oliver. All in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Carried. Thank you very much. That moves us to item 10, the performance report, and at which point I am going to hand over the chair, as agreed, to Councillor Stevenson. So we'll do a quick card change. Thank you, colleagues. Who's going to kick off this item? Performance report, item 10.
I'm happy to do that, Chair. So this is the second report on performance that we've brought to scrutiny in the financial year 24-25, and it's to give an update on the progress against the Children and Young People's Plan. It gives the latest performance information against performance measures that we've set out in that plan, and it does that at both a citywide and a cluster level in terms of geography. It gives an update in terms of progress against our 3 obsessions, and it also gives performance and data in relation to key stages, attainment, attendance, and also EHCP. I'll leave it there, Chair. I don't know if Chris wants to give an overview or whether you want to open the report up to questions.
Thank you, Julie. I can give a quick overview of a couple of areas I think of particular interest, but I won't go through the report in detail. The first bit perhaps touches on the conversation that was just held a minute ago. The report does include references to 2 statutory social care returns, which puts Leeds' performance in the context of comparator groups. That's at point 15 and Appendix 4. And that specifically refers to children looked after numbers and children subject to child protection plans. And I think it's just worth flagging here that over the last 18 months or so, we have seen an increase in those numbers. And at March 24, we were seeing an increasing trend. But since May, June of this year, we've seen a sustained reduction in both those figures. And the December figures for both children looked after and child protection plans are lower than the figure at March 24, and they're also lower than the figure at December 2023. So that reduction we're seeing is, as I say, is sustained at the moment, and puts things in a slightly different light when we compare ourselves to some of the local authorities nationally. The other bit, just to mention, a couple of areas that within the performance report we haven't covered before. We touch on in Appendix 4 about the place efficiency agenda, and that just covers some of the recent activity there. And the update on the health obsession, which still feels quite new to us, that touches on the 0 to 19 public health integrated nursing service, the work MindMates and schools are doing around mental health and wellbeing issues, and finally touches on healthy living
and eating initiatives. But in terms of some of the data and the performance in there, probably best done through questions. Thank you.
Anybody want to raise any questions or comments? On the HCPs, there's a reference to the slight improvement in timeliness. I couldn't find them to hand, but there was, I think it's suggesting that it's 8.4% of EHCPs now met on time. There was some, or was it 9.8? There were some figures recently that was compared us to neighbouring authorities, and it was slightly unfair. I think Calderdale 98% on time, but obviously we're not really a comparable local authority. Is there the data that compares us to other core cities of our similarity?
Thanks, Councillor Stevenson. We do have that data. I haven't got it to hand, but I'm not here to suggest that there isn't still going to be a negative comparison. We are not anywhere near the top of the table in regards to that, even when you take into account that more statistically comparable statistical neighbour. So I think it was a news report on TV where there was a couple of local authorities that were put on. So we are still towards the bottom of that table around compliance at the moment, and we wouldn't pretend that we were anything otherwise. I think the point here is that there is an enormous amount of work going in to try and improve the outcomes there, both in terms of the statutory timescales and also into the lived experience that adherence to statutory timescales leads to. But we acknowledge, and we have done in successive conversations around this table, that it will take time for the work to materialise into changes in lived experience.
Just to say, following on from Dan's comment, that we, as we've discussed here previously, had a significant number of children whose EHCP assessments were out of time. And we've also talked previously about the transition in terms of children who have had funding for inclusion now transferring potentially to an EHC plan or going through a different process. As we're working through that and responding to the needs of those children, that has an adverse impact on our timeliness, because we're introducing more children formally into the data who've not been included before, whose assessments are out of time. We're really clear, that the data will show that, but actually the narrative behind the data is that we are responding to the needs of children in the city and ensuring that we're working towards being able to ensure that all children have an assessment within time. But as we're working through, as Dan's just described, there will actually be a negative impact on the data because we're pulling those children into our processes. I hope that makes sense.
Do colleagues have any other questions? Yep, Councillor Jenkins.
Yeah, on page 239 about elective home education, so the numbers have increased by 131%. So I just wonder really what monitoring is undertaken with regard to those children and what the outcomes are in terms of education, social progress and social value. Thank you.
It's a really good question. What we do within the city in terms of our statutory duty in respect of how we monitor children's education who are electively home educated is far less than we would like to do, and the legislation currently gives us far less power to do anything. So our statutory duty is to offer a visit to a family if they tell us that they want to electively home educate, and then when that offer is responded to affirmatively, we then have to do that visit. That's one visit annually by an education lead who would go to a house or a home if they were invited to do so, to ask for some evidence around the quality of education. And so I think it's fair to say that the national system around this provides for really only a cursory look at what the education provision might look like, and that might be paper-based, it might not happen within the home, and that's what we're provided with within the scope of our duties. Now, we know that there is so much more that we can do, and we build up really strong relationships with our families. We've created a network that we support for electively home educating families to come together, and we attend that. We have surgeries, and we want to provide support. But the point about the statutory duties is that that is voluntary, and the authorities don't have any teeth in respect of that. And whilst there is a proposal to have a kind of local authority register as part of the next legislation that might come through, it still doesn't solve the problem where we are saying that in a small number of cases there might be a risk for a young person being invisible to sort of professionals. I should add that in the absolute majority of cases where there is a home education is going on, that doesn't necessarily mean that there is a safeguarding risk. But what it does mean is that where there might be one, we have very little power to try and identify it. Obviously, there are children who might be subject to support through the various different stages of social care involvement, either at Section 17 or Section 47 or above. And there is suggestion within the new legislation as well that there would be, it wouldn't be okay, it wouldn't be allowed for someone at a certain threshold to be able to be electively home educated if there was that level of social care involvement. So it is really tricky. The numbers have gone up massively. There hasn't been any, as yet, additional burdens funding around this. So we've got the suggestion that there is going to be more for us to do, but we haven't got any additional resource to deliver that with it at the moment. So it is a really challenging space for us, and we're operating as best we can with the available resource to deliver at least the bare minimum of our statutory responsibilities, which I don't think go far enough, I should add.
Just before you come in, Julie, I think it might be worth at some point as having a brief on the children and wellbeing bills proposals around this. We did do EHE before as an item, but there's clearly going to be an update, and I think what's quite important is to understand, I think there's now where the local authority can impose school attendance orders as well in certain cases, so I think it'd be useful for us to know as board members what the changes are, even if it's just a written brief. I think it'd be helpful. Julie?
Absolutely, Chair. Because as an example, I think as Dan set out, there are some quite significant potential changes. You know, one being the local authority actually being asked around decision making for a child to become electively home educated if they are involved with children's social care. What I would say is, I suppose I need to start, I think, in some ways by saying that there'll be a number of children who are electively home educated in the city who are actually faring really well, and that currently that is a choice for parents, you know, and there'll be a number of children who actually have a really positive outcome as a result of that. However, we have to be curious, you know, about the fact that we have had such an increase in Leeds. It's a national issue, it's a national theme, so it's not just something that's happening in Leeds, and we have to be curious about that. You know, we have to think about the experience of children during the pandemic, when there was, you know, quite a seismic shift in terms of children not being required to go to school, and actually how that's impacted on children's thinking, how that's impacted on parental thinking. I think we also have to be really curious about the increase in children who do have special educational needs and disabilities. And actually we just had a whole conversation today about provision and, you know, the have we got sufficient provision, the right provision, quality provision in the city, and actually is there a correlation between children with more complex needs becoming electively home educated because the current system is not meeting their needs. We've got to be curious about all of this. We do have a forum within the directorate which we call PIMS, and Dan is currently chairing that, which focuses on some of the areas where we feel we need to be curious, and electively home educating is one of those. We do have a process in Leeds, which is not the case in every local authority, where a school has been advised by a parent or a carer of their intention to electively home educate a child, that where there's been children's social care involvement or where there's felt to be any vulnerabilities, that actually the school do notify us as a directorate, and we will then respond to that and seek some assurance in terms of the fact that the needs of the children are being met. The other thing that we are looking at, as you'd probably expect, I suppose, is the provision that we've currently got in the city in terms of the capacity, in terms of our electively home educated service. That's not an easy thing in terms of, you know, I suppose the financial challenges that we've just talked about, but it is something that we are looking at to, you know, because we need to assure ourselves that actually we've got the right amount of capacity in the service to respond to the increase in demand. Thank you.
Okay, yep, Helen.
Thank you. Just quickly, although the changes are coming in and we're working hard to understand them, to go back to your original question, Councillor Jenkins, actually knowing the quality of the education, we've talked a lot about you know, the safeguarding and social work involvement and things like that, and as Dan said, you know, we're required, and there will be a register, but actually assessing the quality of the education that's going on at home with elective home, that will be incredibly difficult, if not impossible, for us as a local authority to even assess or to guarantee.
Sorry, just briefly, because I meant to include this in my previous response, that what we have done is we have identified resource to have an education colleague placed at the front door full time. So that's our duty and advice service, which responds to any concerns which a member of the public or a professional refer to the directorate. We have had a colleague who's spent perhaps a day, 2 days at the front door. When we had the joint targeted area inspection last February, it was a suggestion in that inspection that we look at additional provision, and despite the financial challenges that we've got, we have identified that, we've found that, and we are hopeful to have that an individual in post within a matter of months, although we do have an interim position at the front door. And what that does enable us to do is to have that multi-agency information sharing between health, between police, between children's services, children's social care and education, so we can contact schools, gather information in terms of education when we're making decisions at the front door, and I think that's a really positive development in the city. Thank you.
Yep, Helen.
Can I just ask, when you said that schools where there's social work involvement and there's been a notification by parents that they intend to electively home educate the child, is that all, do all schools know that that's what needs to happen? And does that include non-Leeds City Council schools as well?
My understanding is absolutely that that is the case.
Yeah, thanks for the answers. I just wonder, you know, I know there are enormous pressures on social workers, and I imagine it's social workers who visit on a yearly basis. It'd be good to, I mean, I don't want to cause any more work really, because you've got enough already, but it would be good to find out how many of those children who are home educated have got skills in reading and writing and arithmetic, if you like. Just the basic skills in life, if you like, because if they're missing out on those, it's a disadvantage, you know. And thinking about Marmot and being a Marmot city, I think we just need to correlate the issue of home education with disadvantage and what we can do. So I don't want to create any more work, but on the other hand, it may be there's a number of those 1,300 children who are quite vulnerable and will miss out on life.
We don't have the statutory framework to do that at the moment. As Dan said, we can offer an education visit once a year. It doesn't have to be taken up. So we don't have the statutory framework to go and assess the skills of the children who are electrically home educated. I'm right there, aren't I? Yeah.
Final comment, Dan.
Yeah, I think just one final thing that I would say here is that, and I've said it already, is that certainly for a large group of families, the decision to electively home educate is an affirmative one, and it's one which suits the needs of their children and their families, and that's fine. I think we would agree, and to Julie's point about curiosity, the children that we're more potentially concerned about are those for whom there is already some disadvantage in the way that you're talking. I think there are opportunities here, because once a family has made a decision to electively home educate, we've almost lost the argument. And I think that to the earlier point that Julie was making as part of a different conversation, we've got some opportunities around curriculum, around the offer, around what is the entitlement and the proposal that we, the City of Leeds, and our education system is putting in front of families, which ought to be compelling, which ought to meet the needs of the children and families now, which ought to offer a broad and balanced curriculum. And we know that over the last decade, for all sorts of reasons, that broad offer has been perversely disincentivised from where it used to be. But we're starting to have some really good initial conversations around, what does education mean, and how can we create something that is compelling, that actually children and families will say, I want that offer because it's right for me. And rather than trying to solve the problem at the other end where we're trying to knock on doors and we're not necessarily allowed in, what we need to do is go upstream and say, what is our curriculum offer in the city? And I'm excited about what we might end up getting out of that conversation.
Okay, mindful that we really need to be finishing at 1 today, and we've got one item left. So if we end item 10 there, and I think we've captured the points, and the point about elective home education as well could come back to us. So if we could rearrange the deck chairs at the top, please. And thank you to colleagues that are leaving us. So, welcome back, Councillor Venner.
Thank you, it's lovely to be here.
If officers, for the first time that you speak, if you just introduce yourself when you come to speak, mindful of time. In the pre-meet, members discussed the Chair, Councillor Cohen's view that because this is a matter that's currently going through in legislation, that there's not much we can do, really. We have to wait for the government to do it, and we could perhaps respond to it. But a couple of members raised specific points, one being around the opportunity for us to feed in once we know what those regulations are going to be, once they're published, and how to do that. And the other point was about how we're preparing for changes. So we're not going to spend an awful lot of time on it, but if you want to do a quick couple of minutes introduction between you, and then I think Councillor Goodall will probably come to you to raise the point you raised in the members' bit first. So.
Thank you, Chair, for that introduction. So we're here just to quickly review about... Oh, sorry. Heather Thompson, I'm Head of Public Health for the Healthy Living team. So we're here just to look at the youth vaping issue. Obviously, the report's been provided as to where the update is, and has highlighted that there are two parallel pieces of work that are going on at the moment in terms of the government. We've got the law that will be coming in on the 1st of July, which is going to issue the banning of single disposable cheap vapes, which have been a huge concern around the uptake of vaping in children. And running alongside that, we've got the Tobacco and Vapes Bill, which is currently just had its second reading in Parliament. That's the bill that will look at the marketing of vapes and availability of vapes and the regulation around that, alongside the increase of the age of sale. To date, we've obviously discussed this for a couple of years now at this scrutiny board. We've taken several actions, including a response to the consultation. The board has responded in terms of the vaping issues that were raised in the consultation, and I think it would be fair to say is that most of those recommendations from the board have been included and have been addressed within the new bill that's currently being debated. In terms of our further actions that we're going to be taking, we work collaboratively with our colleagues across West Yorkshire in the commissioning of trading standards. At the moment, we haven't had any further information from DEFRA as to what's actually going to happen in terms of communication to retailers and the public about the banning of the single-use vapes. If there isn't any guidance forthcoming from that, we'll be working with our colleagues around about the actions that we can be developing and taking with West Yorkshire Trading Standards, and we would also look to do some communications work with the public and with retailers in Leeds so we can win those hearts and minds over before that legislation actually comes in. So hopefully that answers some of your...
That possibly preempts Councillor Goodall's point, but I'll let him make it now.
Partly, thank you. That's really useful. Yeah, looking at paragraph 12 and listening to what you've said so far, I'm just thinking if there's a kind of sudden cut-off in the availability of vapes, has anyone looked at work around the issues that could create? Is there a risk of more young people starting to smoke cigarettes? Is there anything planned to kind of deal with, I don't know, there could be like sudden massive issues with withdrawal symptoms. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but has anyone thought about that, and are there any plans in place?
I think the ban is going to be really positive, ultimately, isn't it? We don't anticipate it. I think it's going to take time, because I don't know what the DEFRA have said around like the grace period, sort of around retailers getting rid of their current stock, or how we're going to dispose of that. We need to kind of see what comes out from DEFRA around that. But vapes aren't going to be completely banned, so they will still be available, although they're not legally to be sold to under 18s. So I guess you've got a point. We've got to anticipate what do we do then. How do we get some communications out perhaps to young people around how can they kind of deal with that withdrawal, and sort of I continue to kind of get messages out to schools around kind of vapes and illicit vapes and things like that. So that message is continually going out as far and wide as I can possibly get it. And then I'm also meeting up with a subgroup next week to discuss how they can also support around youth vaping as a topic for the year. So I'm going to meet up with them. We're going to look at the data from the My Health, My School survey, and we can kind of get our heads together to think about how do we approach A, the ban, and B, kind of this new legislation that's coming, because we anticipate there's going to be lots of vape and smoke-free places. So there's lots of things we can do together on that, but I'd like to kind of do that in collaboration with the people who are kind of on the ground and have really got that vested interest in children, young people. So it'd be good to work together, but I can keep you posted.
Thank you, that's great.
Councillor Jenkins.
Yeah, thanks, Helen Goddard. I think you've done a great job on vaping and these issues, and it's a real worry, I think, because, well, first of all, to say, I'd suggested in the pre-meeting that we actually complete the consultation document that was only partially completed because it hadn't actually gone through the board. Just for reference, in a way, that to be prepared for the changes in legislation and so on, that we take a stance on those issues that we hadn't actually had gone through the board. So I think it would be good either for your subgroup or a group here to then report back to this group to say that this is our view on some of the issues that haven't been covered. Okay, you get the message. So the other thing is that the vaping industry, aka the tobacco industry, is a massive proponent of vaping, and they won't stop at anything, I don't think. So I think the worry is that, like, we have children who put their hands into rubbish bins to pick out disposable vapes and so on. If you look at the number of vapes that are just sort of disposed of around bins and so on, so it's just, there ought to be a more fly-littering objective to tackle that issue, really, that vapes are not only disposable, but they should be looked after, because we still don't know quite the damage that vapes do. I mean, we think that vaping is going to reduce smoking, but I don't know whether it's true or not. I think it's addictive as much as anything else. It's just a massive industry, and I think if the tobacco industry weren't that convinced that they can make a profit out of it, they wouldn't be doing it. So I think it's just a real worry.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond to that point specifically. This is obviously a really positive piece of legislation, and it's great that, as has been said, the points that were made across this board and the adults, the health scrutiny board have been captured by the legislation, because obviously they were the points other people were raising as well. Vapes are a really important tool in supporting adult smokers to give up smoking, and a totally unintended consequence has been this rise in a generation of children where there's really high rates of vaping, much like there's a place for weight loss drugs for people with the most serious food addictions, but now we're seeing huge amounts of misuse. I think, though, to respond to Councillor Jenkins' point specifically, legislation can be really powerful in this area, and that's best demonstrated by the last big piece of legislation around smoking, which was the legislation passed in 2007. And that's halved rates of smoking in adults. I mean, it's had a really, really powerful impact. So I think it's a really good example of why legislation around public health is important, and we can't just rely on, messaging and people changing their individual behaviour. It's why we need legislation around things like advertising high salt, high fat, high sugar foods. So I'm optimistic that this will have the same positive impact that the last really big piece of legislation did. There's really good evidence around that. Thank you. I don't know if my colleagues want to add anything.
Yes, I can. So if you track, we can look at smoking, because obviously we have years of data on smoking, but if you actually track the decline in smoking, there has been a dip every single time a new piece of legislation has come in. So when we had plain packaging introduced, when we had age of sale, it was increased, when we had the smoke-free. And I think it would be fair to say that as Councillor Venner pointed out, those big declines in smoking prevalence have followed legislation. We have services, and the services are really effective at addressing health inequalities, because the services will then provide help and support to people who probably find it more difficult to respond to legislation and regulation coming in. So a combination of those two. And I think one of the things that we will certainly need to be mindful of in the future is looking at how we adapt those services to include vaping into them, because I think there will be a need for that level of support. I think just one of the other things that I wanted to raise in response to Councillor Jenkins's point about the industry is that we're really mindful that after vaping, something else will come. We can see, we've seen now, we've got an increase in nicotine pouches that are coming up, which are interestingly being marketed as snus, even though they're not. They're calling it tobacco-free snus. So there's a lot of social media outlets about that, a lot of use within footballers, etc. So we're seeing an increase in that. So we've always got to, it feels like we've got to be one step ahead of the industry all the time, because once nicotine pouches have run their course, something else will come in. So we are dealing with having to stay ahead all the time on that.
Okay, final question from Councillor Flint.
Thank you. I agree legislation is really important, but I think also when it comes in, we've got work to do just in understanding young people. So I've got a 16-year-old daughter and spend a lot of time with that age group, and they know that the ban is coming, and probably about half of my daughter's friends vape regularly at their sixth form parties and elsewhere. My daughter doesn't, don't think. So she says. But they like the risk. So legislation makes it more risky. Young people attracted to risk doesn't mean they won't do it. Most of them got older siblings that will just be able to get them for them. So I think when we're looking at education, we need to understand the psychology of it, like why kids are doing it. you know, they've said that the education in their school, you know, they go through all the risks, they go through climate change, trying to appeal to young people, but none of it really sticks. They're just going to do it anyway because they enjoy it and enjoy the risk and feel grown up. So the only people they listen to are their peers. So how can we involve, like, maybe like young people who've had bad experience or have found another way to enjoy risk that's healthier? That's it.
If I had the budget to get Taylor Swift to sort of come along and make an announcement to say vaping was not cool, I think that might help. But I think what's positive with the bill is that they're going to make a lot of changes around the packaging and the stylisation, as well as that marketing, which I think is a massive thing for young people. I mean, I'm not on TikTok, but I know it's kind of rife on TikTok, but there's going to be a lot more kind of stricter rules. Well, they're not allowed to be advertised on TikTok, but it happens, unfortunately. But changing that packaging a bit, like similar to how we've done with tobacco, changing it to something really dull and boring and plain, making it sort of, because I've seen vapes that have LEDs and lights that flash, and I mean, tell me that's not aimed at young people. So kind of pulling it back to being a stop smoking tool, putting them behind screens, which I think we're hoping might come through with the bill. We don't know the full ins and outs of what's coming, but that's what we hope for. And positioning in things like supermarkets. I know Wakefield have done some insight with young people, and one of the kind of outcomes of that was a message around, they were saying all the lights are on green, so we see them everywhere. They are literally on the shelves in the supermarket, as if you can just grab it as part of your grocery shop, and it normalises that behaviour. And so I know kind of we need to get peers sort of talking to each other to try and get that message across, but I think what's really exciting me around this bill is that we're really going to pull back on kind of those displays, which I think that drip sort of feed-in of kind of marketing is having a massive impact on influencing young people. And I think when we kind of pull that back, I really like to think we'll see a big difference, and it'll start to kind of lose its kind of glamour and that lucrative side. And yeah, they might move on to the next thing that the industry brings in, but the bill is looking at all nicotine products as well. So hopefully we can kind of try and make this watertight so that we're going to tackle the vaping issue, and then whatever they try and bring up next, we can stamp on it straight away rather than kind of get into this position where we're in with vapes. So I think, but we can work together as well on kind of trying to see what we can do to engage young people to kind of help bolster some of those kind of regulations as well. I hope that answers it somehow.
We have a final question from Councillor Jones.
So in the legislation, will it also mean that a 20-year-old cannot buy for a 16-year-old? It's called a secondary sale. Is that going to be part of the legislation? Because that's significant.
Yeah, so the age of sale is going to be aimed at tobacco. You know, the raising the age of sale by 1 year every year is for tobacco only. Vapes will remain as a kind of age-restricted product for anyone over the age of 18 can legally buy it. But proxy sales are currently illegal now. It's challenging to enforce and catch. But again, we can maybe push more of that messaging out around reminding people that this is an age-restricted product, and it's also illegal to buy on behalf of a child. So that, yeah, hopefully that answers for you.
Okay, in the pre-meet, Councillor Bowden suggested that perhaps as the legislation goes through and it comes back through committee stage with amendments, we could have a briefing on what's proposed in a sort of layman's terms, what it means to us and what the response will be in Leeds, and if that could be circulated to the board as written evidence as such, the board can then make a decision if it wants to include it in a work programme for the next municipal year. That would be really helpful. One thing that had passed me by actually was the age increment on smoking, and vaping doesn't keep pace, and I'm not quite sure why, because if you sort of want everyone to stop, it could still be used as a tool to come off smoking, but it might be something we could look at when the legislation comes back and we get a brief. So thank you very much for joining us. I'm sorry it was brief, and at the end But we've got an action point there. That brings us to item 12, the work programme, Rob.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, conscious of time, just to put in the public meeting the changes to the working group that we discussed earlier. So the youth services item will no longer progress, and that will be picked up, well, replaced rather with a further working group aimed at the further education item. Other than that, Chair, there's been a very minor adjustment which moves the McAllister review item from the March meeting to the April meeting. Thank you.
Great. Our next meeting is the 19th of March, when Councillor Cohen will be back for his penultimate meeting as Chair. So thank you very much for your efforts today, and we'll see you in March.